The blast hit so hard it knocked me off the couch. One second the night was silent, the next, my garage windows blew outward in a burst of fire that turned the whole yard orange. Smoke flooded the house instantly. I crawled low lungs, burning, stumbling out the back door, just as the flames roared high enough to light the entire street. Neighbors stood frozen on their lawns, phones out, whispering the same question. Who would do this? Police swarmed the scene. One officer hurried to me, holding up a paused frame from my own security camera. "Mr. Thorne, do you know this man I did?" And he wasn't there to burn the garage, he was there to send a message. Long before the flames, before officers showed me the face of the man who tried to burn me alive, there was Judith Hathaway, the first warning sign I should have paid attention to. I met her the day I moved in, when the street still smelled like fresh paint and possibility. She didn't knock. She didn't clear her throat. She simply stepped onto my driveway, like crossing a border she already believed she owned. Navy blazer. Clipboard hugged tight. Eyes that scanned my house the way an appraiser searches for flaws. "You've already breached community standards," she announced. I told her my home wasn't part of Pinewood Estates, that the survey line put me outside her reach. Judith's smile never shifted, but her eyes did a small, precise flicker like a blade catching the light. "Technicalities don't change impact," she said. "A house like yours disrupts cohesion, and disruption spreads." That was her talent, turning opinion into law, preference into pressure. She didn't raise her voice, didn't need threats. Every word she spoke implied consequences she never had to say out loud. I thought it was HOA overreach. Annoying, sure, but manageable. What I didn't know was that Judith didn't tolerate boundaries. Not legal ones, not personal ones, especially not mine. And the fire I barely escaped from. It wasn't a random act. It was her message delivered through someone she trusted to finish what she started. I didn't buy the house for the color or the little porch bathed in afternoon sun. I bought it for freedom. After 10 years of renting, where every landlord dictated wall colors, noise levels, and even how I hung my curtains, I craved a place I could actually call my own. When the survey map confirmed, I sat 15 meters outside Pinewood Estates' HOA boundaries. I thought I'd finally founded a line between control and autonomy. My yellow house white trim, gleaming the yard, mine to shape as I wished, represented everything I'd worked for. Every freelance late night, every side job, every dollar saved, all culminating in a little slice of independence. The neighborhood looked perfect at first glance. Manicured lawns, identical mailboxes, flower beds, arranged with obsessive precision. But the people moved differently. Quick glances when I walked past doors, snapping shut a beat too fast, whispered, conversations fading when I approached. Even my neighbor Vance, who welcomed me with a firm handshake, had eyes that lingered on my house longer than social courtesy demanded. "You're lucky your property sits outside the HOA line," he murmured once. Not a warning, more like a cautionary tale. Then the letters began. 3 days in crisp professional, stamped with Pinewood Estates' seal, repaint to comply with community standards. The second letter arrived the next morning. Then a third each, more insistent, each escalating in tone fines, official notices, threats, veiled in politeness. I shrugged at first. Administrative overreach. Nothing I couldn't handle. And then I noticed her. Judith Hathaway. Not knocking, not calling. Just standing on the sidewalk, clipboard in hand, photographing my house from every angle, measuring my fence lines, recording arrival and departure times. The surveillance wasn't subtle. It wasn't accidental. It was deliberate. The tension crept into nights. Block numbers called at 2 a.m. A muffled female voice, whispering, "Those who resist don't last here." My house, my sanctuary, felt surveilled, contained, like I was living inside someone else's grid. The yellow paint didn't matter anymore. Minor HOA infractions weren't the issue. Judith didn't want compliance. She wanted obedience. And the moment I refused to kneel, I became a problem she intended to remove by law, by pressure, or eventually by fire. The first warning came as a crisp letter slipped into my mailbox 3 days after moving in. Courtesy reminder, exterior paint non-compliant. Polite, official-looking, yet heavy with implication. By the end of the week, I had 5 stacked letters, fines, official warnings, veiled threats, all marked with the HOA seal. Each one escalated, the tone sharper, the language more pointed. Then came Judith Hathaway herself. She didn't knock. She didn't introduce herself again. She just appeared, clipboard in hand, photographing angles of my house I hadn't even noticed, measuring fence lines, recording arrival and departure times. Her eyes flicked over every detail like she was cataloging me as evidence. Every glance, every deliberate step, carried scrutiny, weighing my actions against an invisible standard. Neighbors noticed too. Vance leaned over the fence quietly one evening. "She's been out here 4 times today, taking notes, photographing, measuring," he said, his voice low, cautious. Not commentary, not concern, fear. Something deeper simmered beneath her polite veneer. I tried to dismiss it, administrative overreach, harmless at first glance, but the obsessive precision, the timing, the methodical attention, it was a warning. A calculated signal I had entered a game I wasn't prepared for. Judith trespassed openly, crouching at the corner of my yard, with a tape measure recording exact distances to my fence, snapping pictures as if gathering proof for a trial. One afternoon she lingered outside my windows, clipboard raised, pretending to check something innocuous while tracing angles of my home. Then came the calls. Blocked numbers. 2 a.m. Muffled breaths. A woman's voice calm and deliberate. People who don't cooperate tend to have accidents. I sat bolt upright, scanning empty streets, checking locks, feeling the first true pang of fear. Her surveillance had shifted from persistent to intrusive, impossible to ignore. At the next HOA meeting, she proposed expanding boundaries to include my property. Board members nodded like trained seals. Legal ownership didn't matter. Rules didn't matter. Her word was law, and I was the target. Every observation, every calculated letter, every silent presence outside my windows became part of a systematic campaign. She wanted submission, and she would stop at nothing to test how far she could push. Harassment became vandalism. One morning I woke to the smell of paint thinner. Red letters screamed across my garage, "Go home." My stomach sank. Someone had crossed from intimidation to crime. I called Officer Brennan. 40 minutes later, he arrived meticulous, taking photos and notes. But without a witness or video evidence, his words were cautious. "There's little we can do right now." Social attacks followed. Photos of my yellow house appeared online, captioned with lies, eyesore, threat to property values, entitled outsider. People identified me by name, made claims about criminal history I didn't have, and circulated photos of my movements around the neighborhood. Contractors refused work. Local businesses avoided me. Flyers left on my windshield, passive-aggressive threats in the middle of the night. Neighbors whispered in corridors, glanced when I passed, feigned ignorance. Even those who had once smiled now crossed the street. Isolation wasn't accidental, it was engineered. Every letter, every photo, every online post built a pressure that tested my limits. I realized then this wasn't about rules, it was about dominance. Judith's goal wasn't compliance, it was control. Total, absolute control over my life, property, and peace of mind. Then came the lawsuit. 53 pages, $100, 0 inches, damages demands to repaint or face demolition of exterior elements. My lawyer flipped through it and laughed bitterly. The claims were fishing for panic, but even baseless lawsuits cost thousands in filing fees, motions, and depositions. My emergency fund was at risk. I documented everything. Letters, sightings, emails, photos, timestamps. I researched HOA law, uncovered precedent cases where courts consistently dismissed attempts to enforce rules on non-member properties. The next HOA meeting revealed just how far Judith would go. She orchestrated a vote to expand the HOA's boundaries to include my property, ignoring ownership records and jurisdiction. A board member hesitated, objecting only to be cut off by Judith. I recorded every word, every vote, every subtle threat captured on tape. Evidence of harassment, election manipulation, and disregard for legal limits piled up. The law wasn't acting yet, so I became the authority. Every act Judith committed became evidence, documented and time-stamped. The stakes shifted. This wasn't just my house anymore. It was the beginning of dismantling a corrupt system. It escalated to violence. One night, motion alerts lit up my security cameras, a man gasoline can in hand approaching my garage. I dialed 911, heart hammering. I checked locks, triple-checked alarms, and pulled every precaution I could think of. Officers arrived just before he could ignite the fire. Later, a dropped wallet and registration traced him to Preston Hathaway, Judith's husband. 3 nights later, they didn't stop. Flames devoured my garage. Truck storage, workspace, everything gone. Fire investigators confirmed accelerant patterns. Security footage captured a man's build gate and a gold watch. The match was exact Preston Hathaway. Judith's warning wasn't a whisper anymore. It was action. The fire wasn't the beginning, it was a message. My life, my home, my safety were under assault, deliberate and personal. I realized in that moment that nothing short of exposing them completely would end it. The stakes had escalated beyond property or petty fines. This was now a war, one that would either destroy me or destroy the corrupt empire Judith had built over years. Evidence, law, preparation, these became my only shields, and the confrontation waiting at the courthouse would decide everything. The courthouse felt like a battlefield. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, mingling with the scent of polished floors, anxious coffee, and nerves stretched thin. I sat behind my lawyer, heart hammering in my chest, as the gallery filled with neighbors, journalists, and the few who had endured months of harassment alongside me. Across the aisle, Judith Hathaway appeared immaculate cream suit, pressed folders, stacked neatly, posture rigid as a statue. Her face composed and cold betrayed nothing, yet I could feel her tension. The judge called the session to order. Judith's attorneys began presenting their case. My yellow house violated HOA standards, threatened property values, and caused community disturbance. Their words were precise, rehearsed, designed to intimidate and sway opinion. My lawyer leaned close, whispering, "It's time. Show them everything." When the judge allowed the presentation of counter-evidence, the atmosphere shifted. Judith's eyes flickered a microsecond of panic before she composed herself. I could feel it, the invisible fortress she had built over Pinewood Estates beginning to crumble. This was the moment when her power, carefully cultivated for years, would meet its first true challenge. The evidence hit like a hammer. First, the survey maps my property outlined clearly outside HOA jurisdiction, separated by a 15-meter buffer. Next, Colette's trove of documents, manipulated ballots, inflated legal fees, funneled to HOA and Associates' emails, outlining a strategy to target residents who resisted compliance. Each page revealed deliberate harassment, intimidation, and financial exploitation. Then came the security footage. Preston Hathaway approaching my garage, gasoline can in hand, gold watch gleaming in infrared night vision. Even a fleeting glimpse of his college ring confirmed his identity. The forensic analyst explained every frame, gait movement, timing, probability of error, less than 1 in 10 million. The courtroom went silent. Reporters leaned forward, neighbors whispered, and Judith's attorneys exchanged uneasy glances. My lawyer laid out the financial connections, fines, enforcement actions, and HOA dues funneled directly into the Hathaway law firm. Every act of intimidation, every dollar collected through fear and abuse, all documented and undeniable. By the time the last document and video were displayed, the room understood it. The empire she had built on compliance and fear had no foundation left. Her meticulously cultivated control was collapsing, and the weight of proof was unshakable. The judge turned to Judith. "Mrs. Hathaway, did you authorize these communications?" Her voice, smooth and honeyed, tried to deflect. I was protecting the community. Mr. Thorne refused to comply with standards. The prosecutor cut in, calm and precise. "Did you instruct him, or anyone else, to intimidate or threaten Mr. Thorne's silence?" Judith's composure wavered. Screens displayed, manipulated ballots, inflated invoices, orchestrated harassment, all tied directly to her. Preston's confession was read aloud. She said, "If he wouldn't cooperate, we'd make his life expensive and miserable." She said, "If he disappeared, all our problems would go away. I tried to scare him. I didn't mean to hurt anyone." Judith sat, frozen mask cracking. Every piece of evidence, emails, videos, financial records, witness testimony, left no room for her carefully crafted narrative. The jury digested the facts, a pattern of harassment, abuse, and criminal intent orchestrated over months. 90 minutes later, the jury returned. The forewoman read the verdicts: Preston guilty of arson, attempted murder, and assault with a deadly weapon. Judith guilty of conspiracy to commit arson, conspiracy to commit murder, embezzlement, wire fraud, and extortion. The gavel fell. Relief surged. Months of meticulous documentation, preparation, and patience had led to this moment. Judith's eyes found mine, disbelief, horror, and the cold realization that her kingdom had finally crumbled. For the first time in months, the fear lifted. Justice wasn't a concept. It was tangible. And for once, it was in my hands. The courthouse smelled of polished floors, stale coffee, and tension. I sat behind my lawyer, the gallery packed with neighbors, journalists, and the few who had braved months of harassment alongside me. Across the aisle, Judith Hathaway sat in a cream-colored suit, immaculate her posture, perfect clipboard, replaced by glossy folders. She didn't glance at me, but I could feel her eyes behind that composed facade. The judge, a stern woman with reading glasses perched low, called the session to order. Judith's attorneys began outlining their nuisance claim. My yellow house violated community standards, harmed property values, and warranted $100 0 inches damages. The words felt hollow, rehearsed. My lawyer leaned close, whispering, "Time to show them the truth." When the judge allowed the first presentation of counter-evidence, the room shifted. I could see the flicker in Judith's eyes, a split second of hesitation, a crack in the armor she wore for months. My heart pounded. This was the moment the empire she built on fear might start to crumble. The sentencing hearing lasted less than an hour. The evidence didn't need more time. It had already crushed every possible defense. Preston Hathaway was sentenced first. 15 years in state prison for first-degree arson, attempted murder, and use of a deadly weapon. No parole eligibility for 10 years. The judge called his actions deliberate, reckless, and nearly fatal. Preston didn't argue. He didn't even look up. Then Judith stood. The prosecutor listed the charges slowly, one by one. Conspiracy to commit murder, conspiracy to commit arson, wire fraud, felony extortion, election tampering, large-scale embezzlement, and racketeering under state RICO statutes. The courtroom was silent as the judge spoke. "Mrs. Hathaway," she said, "you did not merely abuse authority. You weaponized an entire community against innocent people. You turned a neighborhood into a revenue machine fueled by fear. And when legal pressure failed, you turned to fire." Judith was sentenced to 28 years in state prison. No early parole, no sentence reduction for good behavior, a mandatory minimum of 20 years served. On top of that, $1.3 million in restitution to HOA victims. Permanent ban from serving on any HOA board in the United States. Disbarment proceedings initiated against the law firm linked to her scheme. All personal assets seized under racketeering forfeiture laws. Her house, her accounts, her investments, gone. The judge ended with one final line that echoed through the courtroom. "You didn't lose control because of one mistake. You lost it because this was who you chose to be." Judith didn't cry this time. She just stood there, finally powerless. Life slowly returned to its rhythm, but this time it felt permanent. I kept the yellow paint exactly as it had been, slightly brighter, a visual statement of resilience and victory. Window boxes bloomed with pink roses planted in honor of Mavis. The elderly widow fined $2,000 for flowers deemed inappropriate. She visited one afternoon, cookies in hand, tears in her eyes, whispering gratitude. The streets, once uniform and sterile, now reflected individuality. Homes painted freely, gardens, thriving driveways, open to RVs, children playing without fear. Freedom looked messy, but alive, authentic, and joyous. I began helping other homeowners facing predatory HOAs, teaching legal rights, documenting harassment, and advising residents on how to protect themselves. Calls poured in from across the state. The fight I had endured had grown into a movement to prevent anyone else from suffering. Every story reinforced what I had learned: unchecked power always demands accountability. 6 months later, I saw Judith in a prison financial literacy program. Her hair streaked gray, her composure diminished. She observed quietly as I taught about consumer rights, ethics, and legal protections. At the end, she whispered an apology. I replied calmly, "I didn't come for your apology. I came to teach rights, the ones you tried to take away." She nodded and disappeared behind the program's gates, a humbled figure stripped of the empire she had built. Standing on my porch, sunlight reflecting off the yellow siding, listening to Miles laugh in the yard, I finally felt real peace. Justice had been delivered in full, through the law, through restitution, and through the collapse of the power she had misused. Power without accountability always ends the same way in consequences. From ashes and fear, life and freedom rose. And this time, they were lasting.